the hospital. Not sure if everybody heard of that, or so if I don't remember when we go to close, if you all remind me of that one too. We are in a new study we started last week in the book of Daniel, and we just did some kind of introductory things last week, and we started into the text. We're going to be fully in the text tonight. When it comes to this book, it's really easy to think, well, Old Testament book, we know the furnace story, we know the lion's den story, but this book is really a fascinating book for many reasons, and it's like a key book. It helps us to understand other books. So the more we spend and we can understand this book, the easier it is to understand, for instance, a really, really misused book called Revelation. So we're going to get into a lot of that as we go forward, but starting tonight, we're just going to start off with a little bit of a review and go backwards to some of the very first verses as we finish out chapter 1. And if you remember with me, Daniel, who was Daniel? What do you all remember about his story, early part of his story? I'm going to have to speak up because I'm getting older. He was yeah? He was a Babylonian captive. Where was he taken from? The kingdom of Judah. Israel was gone by that time, taken away by the Assyrians about 200 years before that. A little less than that, but what was his lineage? I mean, was he, a common guy? Was he? There was the sons of nobility, so he was of some kind of priestly house underneath that priestly tribe of Judah. So when we think of Daniel, he was someone who was probably very much in the up and coming ranks in Judah. But what happens? This story begins with what? It was already mentioned, he's a captive.
King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, and God allowed it for him to come in and take it.
Yeah. So Nebuchadnezzar, after he is defeated about everything north and east and west of Judah, he is going to come against Jerusalem, and he's going to siege it. He's going to do it 3 times, actually, kind of setting up vassal kings before he finally just obliterates it in the last one in 586. But this is somewhere around 605 BC, and he takes not only Daniel and some of these young men, but he takes items from the temple and all this. And just really quickly, in the first couple of verses there, it was during the reign of a king named Jehoiakim. He was not a good king, and he takes some of those items from the temple back to the land of Shinar, back to his idol houses and so forth that will come up later with his grandson. We talked about this verse in verse 8, that Daniel, being taken captive, all those things, he was a young man. I don't believe he was of age, since he's being called a young man, to be in the army, and that was 21 for Judah and Israel. So he had to have been younger than that. Most people believe he was somewhere in the late teens. I don't know if there's a final way of figuring that out, but he was a young man. And he was taken to a far-off country, not only him, but others with him. And it says he purposed in his heart not to defile himself with the king's delicacies. And we spent a little bit of time talking about that last week. The reason why I want to come back to it is, this is really the theme of the whole book. If you are faithful in small things, you'll be faithful in big things. Do you remember anybody saying that in Scripture? Jesus said that. That's exactly what Jesus said. If you're faithful in the small things, you'll be faithful in the big things. If you're not faithful in the small things, you won't be faithful in the big things. And what does he mean by that? It's character, isn't it? If we can't stand up for the things that seem like they're small, it's almost the reverse of the world's culture. We would go and say, well, that's not a big deal. I can maybe not have to make a stand here. But Daniel didn't see it that way. He was faithful in the small things, which leads him into this life of an example and what we're calling tonight the faith of one man. Now, we're going to see the faith of his friends, But in the story, when they were approached to eat this the king's food and the delicacies and drink the king's wine, did they speak up? No, Daniel did. Now, they could have been a little bit younger than him. There could have been all kinds of reasons. I'm sure they're terrified. I'm not trying to beat them up. I'm just saying that he's the one who steps up, and his faith becomes a catalyst. He becomes the one willing to stand up and take the pressure and allows others to. And it's not only just a catalyst, it's also that teaching example, isn't it? So then right after this, and I don't think it's by any accident, after we finish chapter 1, we're going to go to chapter 2, where Daniel doesn't appear at all. And the most likely reason is, remember, he's a noble, he is an advisor, he's probably been sent somewhere to check on things, to gather information, to whatever, and he's not in the main province when these things happen, but we see his 3 friends and making a stand, right? But it says he purposed in his heart. And we talked about the idea that this is a foundational choice. Before he had to make any other choices, he said, I'm not going to defile myself. So when those things came in front of him, the decision was already made. He just had to what?
Show that he was not going to participate.
Yeah. He was going to show that he did. He's going to walk through it. The decision's already made. He just now has to walk through it, and that's exactly what he does. We're going to pick up on a little bit more of that, though, tonight as we get into this just a little bit more, starting in verse 11. So, Daniel chapter 1, we have down to verse 11 is where we're going to get started. Actually, let's go ahead and pick back up since, we were reviewing anyways. We'll just pick back up in verse 9. We'll get ourselves to verse 11 here in a second. Now God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink, for why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? And then you would endanger my head before the king. So we made mention of both those pieces, that God has brought him into favor. We talked a little bit about the providence of God. We have just seen it very heavily in the story of Joseph, and now we see it again here. But also, this eunuch, this chief of the eunuchs, is making a bold decision himself, isn't he? Because if he allows Daniel to do this, what could happen to him? Yeah, he could lose his life. Okay? So then, starting in verse 11, this is Daniel's response. Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. And then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. And as you see fit, so deal with your servants. So he consented with them in this matter and tested them 10 days. So there's a couple things I want to point out in this text, and I'll put it up behind me because I have it on the screen. Daniel has made a choice. Is he arrogant in his choice? It doesn't seem to be.
No.
He's not finger-waving. And how do you tell? Look at how he talks to this man. He knows this man's in a hard spot. His life is on the line. He's actually talking to his steward, but still the same deal. And he says what? Please. I mean, it's a good old-fashioned mom. I've been trying to teach us that since we've been this big, right? I mean, the idea that you're going to be kind, you're going to be gracious, and here's Daniel. A lot of people's lives are on the line. He's not rude. He's not arrogant. He's not, this is a time for me to make some grand verbal stand and tell you how evil you are and how great I am. No. He just says what? Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us 10 days. And let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. That way we don't have to worry about how your food was prepared, sacrificed, what's in it. We're going to eat these vegetables, drink water. That'll be pleasing to God. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young man who eat the portions of the king. And notice, and as you see fit, so deal with your servants. Now, what is he setting up here? Is he talking about months? Is he talking about years? He's talking about a small window. He's asking for some space to test. And then he even ends it with what? That
Whatever you decide.
Whatever you decide, we'll deal with it. Now, is there anything we learned from how Daniel's dealing with this? We started with the idea that he has a purposed heart. And if we're going to kind of walk in those shoes and say, okay, I want to have a purposed heart that I don't want to defile myself before God, whether it's food or something else, I'm going to go out into this world and I'm going to try to live for Him. Now, I'm not going to do it perfectly. I understand that. I know that. But I'm going to do my best to live by that purpose. Does that make sense? That's what we mean by purposed heart. So now someone has come to me and has put me in a spot where if I do what they've asked me, now who is this? This is someone in authority, a boss. If we were talking to teenagers, a teacher, hopefully that never happened, but a parent, a family member, a spouse, whatever, has put me in a spot where they're asking me to do something I know is not right, or is taking me away from something that's right. Can we learn something from Daniel?
And I tell a little story. I was very serious about playing basketball. It was very important to me. It was very competitive. And when I decided to get baptized, I realized we practice on Wednesday nights. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I said, the coach is not going to let me leave to go to Bible study. But I guess I got the courage to go ask. And he said, absolutely, you go and don't worry about it. And I was just kind of shocked about it. But I thought, sometimes you just have to ask. And the way you ask is important too.
Yeah.
How you deal with people. They don't want to be,
Would it have been different if you came up to your coach and said, Coach, sorry, I won't be here Wednesday because I'm going to Bible study?
Yeah.
Versus, Coach, Bible study is really important for me. Would you be okay if I left from it? It matters how you talk to people, doesn't it? What's the old saying? You get more flies with honey than with vinegar or whatever. I'm trying to figure out why people want flies, but I've never understood that. It's like, I think I'll go with the vinegar because I don't want any flies. But anyway, it matters. And we see that this is a hard spot, and he knows his life's on the line, his faith's on the line, and he's taking up for his friends. You can see that he says us. Then let give us vegetables. So he's taking up for at least the other three. And what's the result? Look at verse 14. He consented with them in this matter and tested them 10 days. Now, 10 days is not a big window. It's not a huge window to make huge health changes. So for this next part to be so visible, again, I'd say God's hand is in it. But he just asked for 10 days to basically prove that they're going to be just fine. This eunuch is not making a religious decision. You understand that? What's his decision being made on? Why is he so worried about this? Yeah, this is just about authority and consequence and so forth. I don't know that there's any expression here that he's, so given to the gods of Babylon that he doesn't want to. That's not what it is. He's just worried about his head, literally.
We'll read later that King Nebuchadnezzar had absolute power. He wanted to kill you, he'd kill you. He could do whatever he wanted.
Yes.
So whatever his mood was.
Yeah. And that's how he operated. Like many such despots in the history of mankind. All right, so dropping down to verse 15. And at the end of the 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. And thus the steward, well, let me stop there. Just for verse 15. What happens in those 10 days?
They get healthy.
Yeah. Their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men. I don't know how they got fatter eating vegetables. I don't know if that's supposed to be that, but they looked healthier. I think that's the idea that we need to get here. And I don't know that 10 days, people come in here and made this. Have you heard the Daniel diet? And they'll come in here and that was a big spiritual thing there for probably 10 years ago, but that was probably around of it 40 years before that. And they'll come in here and just eat water and vegetables. It's the Daniel diet. I'm like, well, okay. Well, David ate everything but a pig. But yeah, it's not so much, I think, what they're eating as where's the blessing coming from.
Coming from God.
Yeah, he's with them. There's going to be something else here, and I want to make sure we see it at the end, but we can already see hints of it. If we step out with God, God will provide. Now, we may say those things and we may share those things, God will provide, those kind of concepts. But I want you to pay really close attention to these three young men. They have absolutely nothing. They have no homes. They have no say. They have no authority. They have no wealth. They have no family to kind of argue for them. They're completely at the bequest of Nebuchadnezzar and his rule and reign and his authorities. We understand that? They can't bribe anybody. They have nothing to offer, anything, other than their faith in God. Now, these three, not just Daniel, these three are going to become some of the most powerful men in the whole Babylonian Empire, Daniel being chief of them. How does that happen? How does someone with absolutely no resources and basically a slave become so powerful? Inside of that, and this is something I think is really important for us to see, we often will look at the job in front of us, and we just made this mention last week, kind of combining some stories we've been working on with the disciples when they're asked to feed the 5,000. We'll look around and we'll see our resources, that they're not there, and we'll say we can't do it because it's not there. And what ends up happening in both that story, this story, Joseph's story, is if we walk with God, what is God going to provide?
Everything that's needed.
That's right. What's needed in His time and in His way, but it's going to be there. And that's something that takes faith. It is not easy. We like to know, and I'll just be honest, I put myself in that. I'm not trying to say I'm above this. I'm trying to grow in it. But that bank account, that has my last name on it, makes a lot of decisions for me. Does it make a lot of decisions for you? It's really easy to be limited sometimes in the way we think, even spiritually, because that's how we're trained. Our whole world works. If I don't have enough money, I can't go do it. I'm not talking about being rash or reckless or anything like that. But sometimes the resources aren't there until we step out. And I want to show this in a bigger way here in just a moment. Let's go back down to our text. At the end of the 10 days, they were fatter, better looking, whatever it was. And look at verse 16. Thus the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. The they there, and I think this is a little tricky, I don't think he's talking about Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, and Daniel. I think he's talking about all the rest of the young men in this program. So what Daniel's standing up, and remember, where did these men come from? They came from Judah. They came from that conquest. Now, there's probably others from other conquests. I'm not trying to say there's nobody else there. But Daniel standing up not only encourages his friends to stand up, but who actually benefits? The whole group, however big it is. So you see a spiritual, you see a physical, you see all these things happening because Daniel had a purposed heart that he made decisions from. Not rudely, but purposefully. What would have happened if you'd said no? I don't know. We don't have that part of the story, do we? But I'd say Daniel would have refused, whatever the price was. But he probably wouldn't have been rude about it. But here we go. So now where do we get to take this story, Anna? Well, keep going. Verse 17. As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Look at that verse. Did they already have it? No. When did God give it to them?
There and then on the spot.
Yeah, but after they stood up and did what was right, He provided the resources for what was next. Just let that swing for a second. If you're like me, you want to know what you're doing tomorrow and the week after. You want to be able to plan things. I get that. I promise you I get that. I'm not the greatest planner, but in the big things in life, I want to know. I think I've shared this with you. If we travel, we don't get a lot of travel, but we go to the beach or something like that on a small vacation. My biggest thing is I want to know where I'm going and where I can park. I mean, it's like, I don't know why, but that's my biggest whatever. I want to know where I'm going to park when I get there. I don't want to be driving around like I don't know what I'm doing. I want to be able to park, and then I'm good. If I'm on foot, we can walk wherever far we need to. But I want to get there, and there's a place for me to park. There's certain things I want to know. That's what I'm getting at. I'm trying to make fun of myself a little bit. But are we always going to be able to know? What about spiritually? How does this apply to us? It's easy to look at Daniel's life, but how would it apply to us today? You all tell me. You're looking at his story. You've heard what we've talked about. You've seen what God has done. You've seen what they have done. How does it apply to us?
God's going to make a way for us, I believe. We just have to be obedient. And there might be consequences, good or bad, but we just have to be obedient.
Yeah. We've got to be willing to stand up and take a step out, open up, speak, whatever the moment requires. We can't just sit on the sidelines. If we sit on the sidelines, two things happen. One, we can't be the inspiration that Daniel was for others. But two, the resources that we're looking at, we'll never get to. I don't mean to use past things. I'm not, other than they're the only frame of reference I have to use to try to set up an example. Before we came here, I worked with two congregations, one in Monroe County and then one in Smiths Grove at Three Forks. When I went to Monroe County, as a congregation, it was it had some issues there. There's two big families that kind of made up that congregation. One were kind of in the eldership and so forth, and the other ones weren't. And they had grandpa's issues were still on their table. Matter of fact, it came up in a meeting once, and they were talking about where the building was built, and the building had been there for 30 years. Okay, they just couldn't let things go. But the biggest problem I faced there was they were good with it. All their family were there. They weren't eager to go out. They thought they knew everybody, and everybody had already made their choice. They'd already set their mind that this is all we can do. And we're happy with it. And eventually I said, I'm not happy with that. We should be going out. We should be reaching people. We should be teaching people. We should be looking to do things. And I went to a congregation at Smiths Grove. When I started there were 53. It was an old white frame building. It was moved there in 1907 from a little area called Railton on skids with mules. We don't know how actually old it was. We just know it landed on that spot in 1907. Well, we were growing. Within the first couple of years, we'd hit 80, and we had some space issues. Against the wall, there was even less space to walk there. It's here now. We had a couple of young mothers, and they'd have to carry the babies like this up over the pew and the sidewalk all the way down. And I'm like, and everybody was like, well, we don't want to do anything because we don't know if we'll grow further, if we'll have the money, if we'll do. And we went like that for a year and a half. I'm going to tell you that spiritually, these are the things that hook us. We got to be able to say, if it's the right thing to do, if it's the faithful thing to do, then we need to step up and do it. What ended up happening when we did, the resources that we were worried about, they were there. Will that happen every time? I don't know. I'm not seeing it not happen. That's the thing. So I'm kind of thinking that probably so. If Daniel doesn't stand up, this is not even a question. There's not even a reality in which to ask. Does these resources show up? Now, I want to take you to the New Testament because this is exactly what Jesus says. To him who has much, what? Much will be given. Well, what context did he say that in? He shares a little parable. It says there's a master who leaves resources with 3 servants. And you might remember there's 2 versions of that. You have the talents and the minutes, and you've got, so I'm going to just stick with the talents. Talents is money. And for us to understand it's opportunity. But the talents, he leaves 1 5, 1 2, and 1 1. And the 5 goes and does what with the 5 he's given? He what? But how does he do that? Just generically, because it doesn't tell us in great detail, but what does he do with it? He invests it. That's what he tells us. He invests it, he doubles it. When master comes back, he says, here's the 5 you gave me, here's 5 more. And he says, blessed are you, faithful, and enter in and all that stuff that comes with it, right? The 2, what does he do? He invests it, and he gets back 2. And he gets the same message from the master as the man with 5. And part of that was, I've given you 5, then you use 5. I've given you 2, then you use 2. That's all God's looking for. But what about the man with 1?
He hid it.
He hid it. And what was his justification for it?
He's afraid to use it.
He's afraid he would lose it. And some of the harshest words I remember Jesus sharing in a parable come after that, because he says, you wicked and useless man. What was Jesus trying to teach? Good banking principles? No. You understand if you go invest, it's even riskier than it is today. In that day, there's no FDIC that's going to come back and say, oh, you lost your money, here it is. He put it to use. They put it to use. The one who didn't, it was taken from him and what? Given to one of the others. What did they receive? More resources to use. What is going to happen? Well, now they're going to have the resources, the faith, and so forth to set up chapter 2. Okay? Now, do all these things make it nice, easy, and beautiful parallel into our lives? Maybe not necessarily, but the principles do. And that's what we need to learn. And it's the same thing that Jesus taught when he taught us to live by faith. It's not just, oh yeah, I'm going to do all the worship things correct. It includes that. I'm not saying it doesn't. But it's the way we live. It's the way we approach. It's the way we deal with things. It's the way we make decisions. It's who we talk to, who we don't talk to, when we talk, when we don't talk. It's everything of who we are. Does that mean we're going to mess up? Well, we're going to mess up probably often. But that's not an excuse to not do. Thoughts, comments? I feel like I talked a lot there, so. Disagreements. I can take it. I got big shoulders. We can handle it.
I think whether a church, whether it grows or not, I mean, you still are making the effort. You don't just sit back and not use your resources. But I think God blesses you in many ways, and so we have that attitude, I hope. Yeah.
Well, I think in that illustration, what I was definitely not trying to make commentary on current state of affairs. I've only started to get to know this congregation and you all individually, and I've seen you all just naturally do the things that we should be doing. But you don't know who's in the next family. You don't know what talents they bring. You don't know what resources they bring in. And that's part of it. But if you never reach out and they never brought in, then the congregation doesn't have those things. And that's why all this stuff becomes linked together. That's how Ephesians 4, that we all provide what we can provide, and we're knit together until we come to the perfection of the maturity of Christ. Let's go ahead and pull the last couple verses because we are at getting close to time here. I know it's a big chunk. but it's in front of you too, and I'm going to highlight part of this. It's the last part, 19 through 21. Now, at the end of the days, when the king had said that they should be brought in. Now, if I remember right, is it 2 years, 3 years that they were going to be trained and they were going to be, I can't remember now. Anyways, it was sometime, a couple years. 3 years, yeah, verse 5. So at the end of 3 years, that's what we're talking about. Now, at the end of the days, when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, and then the king interviewed them. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar himself interviews these men. Okay? And among them all, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Therefore, they served before the king. All right. It's this middle section I really want us to focus on. And nobody was like who? I don't know how many men are in this group. But these 4 men stand out to Nebuchadnezzar himself. Not the eunuch steward, but when they're brought in, probably for the very first time, Nebuchadnezzar sees this group, and who does he see? These 4 men, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. And then look at verse 20. And in all matters of wisdom. Now, these men were selected just like any of these kind of men anywhere else that they conquered. In this Babylonian, the Chaldeans were conquering everything and everybody down into Egypt. And they were found to be what? Yeah, look at that. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. Now, I'm not going to say that this should be known to us, but I think it should. Because David wrote in Psalm 119 that the word of God made him what? Wiser than his enemies, more equipped than his teachers. What have these men been doing? Living out the wisdom of God. And who's noticed? Do you think it was because they could do math better? I'm sure those kind of things were involved in this. But remember the verse. God had blessed him with wisdom above all others, and it's noticeable. And then, of course, we have the last verse. Thus, Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. We're still going to have a lot that happens before that. But Daniel lived past that, by the way. He's going to continue with Nebuchadnezzar all the way through. Okay? What is the first part, the first chapter of Daniel teach us? What does it teach us about your circumstance? What does it teach us about your resources?
Use them to God's benefit.
Yeah, but what if you don't have them?
Do the best you can, of course, God.
Sometimes you just got to make a stand. God will provide. Now, watch this, because is that theme not repeated in chapter 2? When they build this monster of an idol to King Nebuchadnezzar, plotted by the satraps and stuff that want to get rid of Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael. And they have to kneel down and all that when the music plays. And when Nebuchadnezzar, I know we're ahead of ourselves, but you all know the story, plays it again, gives them another chance. They say, no. And he says, what God can free you from my hand? And what did those young men say? Our God is able. But even if he doesn't, we won't bow a knee. Where did they learn that? Daniel chapter 1, watching their friend Daniel stand up and say, even if it costs me a life, I can't eat that. These are the things that matter. They build. And when we walk in them, the biggest resource we have, which is our faith, grows. I hope we see that. I really do. These young men stood out, and we'll make the counter of this here in a moment. Not only do people notice, but people notice. And what we're going to find out is people who are jealous and don't want you to have success, they're going to notice too. And sometimes standing for God will bring about what? Enemies. We've been studying about Jesus. You all have been studying about Jesus as long as you've been a member of the church, as long as maybe some of you all have been alive. He did everything right. What did he find? A lot of enemies, didn't he? Unfortunately, that comes with it too, and we'll see that with these three men and eventually Daniel as well. Final thoughts. We're right at 1:45, but questions? I think it's great to open up our Bibles and study. I think there's just no replacing that element. But it really becomes powerful when we take something and we challenge ourselves to live by it. So I hope tonight that it's something we've said about purposing in our heart, making a stand, not always waiting for there to be the resources we think there should be, but walking faithfully, that will encourage us to apply it this week. But tonight, maybe there's someone considering something in their life right now. And we do the prayers of the church, considering our audience tonight. I don't know if there's anyone who has not obeyed the gospel, but if there is such a one who has not obeyed the gospel and would choose to tonight, or like I said, the prayers of the church, or maybe even as we sing this song, you just think about what we just said about making a challenge to yourself in your faith this week to do something that maybe you've been putting off and actually stepping up as Daniel did with that purpose and walking. But we're going to sing a song of invitation. You got a song picked out for us?
214.
Number 214. Let's sing the song together. We'll stand if that's okay. And if you have need, would you make a note as we stand to sing?